We will have the first presentation is entitled Intercultural Adaptability of Algerian Students Abroad, an application of communicative theory of cross-cultural adaptation by Professor Amina Guerriche from the University of Constantine. Professor Guerriche's research interests are education and intercultural studies. Professor Guerriche, I give you the floor, and the microphone and the cameras are yours. A friendly reminder, 20 minutes for presentation and 10 minutes for questions. Professor Guerriche, it's all yours. Okay, Professor Guerriche. So according to the information that you are posting in the chat box, I will play the video. And as it is a 38 minutes video, I will stop it in 20 minutes so that the audience can then ask you questions. Is that correct, Professor Guerriche?
Yes, no problem.
Thank you very much. But anyhow, if you want to deliver the presentation, you're free to do it. Shall we go for the video or you want to go for the presentation?
Because I already recorded the video with all the information and I already invested the efforts into doing that. So I would prefer to play the video, and then if there are any questions, they can write them in the box, and
Great.
I will, and I will answer that.
Perfect. Let's get started. Give me a moment, please. So dear participants and Professor Guerriche, could you please confirm if you can see my screen with the presentation in this moment?
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
So without any further ado, I'm going to tackle all the points that I'm going to talk about in this presentation. So as I said before, this is guided by the Kim's theory. This research is guided by Kim's theory, integrative theory of cross-cultural adaptation. Now, in this study or in this presentation, I will provide new insights on the possible impact that intercultural exposure can have on the process of intercultural adaptability on the basis of the case study of Algerian students in the UK. I'll be talking about the rationale of the study, why I have done it, what inspired me to do it. I'll be talking about the theoretical framework of Kim. I will be also tackling Algerian students' mobility, how it has changed throughout the years, how the countries have diversified lately, and especially in relation to the UK. I will also talk about findings and some of the theoretical contributions. So, stemming from a significant increase of migration is the growing interest in exploring intercultural between society contact and relations. Now, in addition to the permanently resident migrant population and multinational employees and academics, international students have become increasingly mobile in the last decades, putting themselves in socioculturally different environments. That is, they are challenged on a daily basis when they do a study abroad, for example, program. Now, in the case of study abroad students, they are put in unfamiliar context when it might be difficult for them to locate themselves within the new cultural framework. During the last decade, higher education institutions and governments have been increasing their efforts to incentivize study abroad participation. Now, these efforts are grounded in the belief that the study abroad participation nurtures culturally competent individuals who can effectively function in today's multicultural environment. So, I have conducted this study to look at the intercultural immersion experience of an underrepresented research population. The experiences of Algerians need to be investigated, especially that the number of mobile Algerian students is increasing as a result of many higher education collaboration projects, either with the UK or with many other countries. There is a growing interest actually in investigating experiences of students outside their cultural comfort zone in order to support the claim that intercultural immersion helps in nurturing culturally competent individuals. Such research took small homogeneous groups of Americans or of Chinese or of French, for example, and were conducted following a self-assessment check scale, a quantitative design, or analyzing different journal narratives. There is a need actually to follow a rigorous methodological plan that would allow the construction of rich descriptive accounts of the students' experiences. Hence, in this study, I have followed an ethnographic case study research design and multiple data collection methods in order to look at the developmental process of Algerian students through following a theoretical framework, originally gathering 3 theories, but as I said before, I'm only focusing on Kim's theory for today in this representation. And that will actually take us to the next slide, where I will be talking about Kim's integrative theory of cross-cultural adaptation. So, some researchers point out that through cultural exposure and contact with the host community, students are going to construct an intercultural knowledge about the host culture, which may facilitate their adjustment and coping. However, the experience of adjustment and coping to an unfamiliar cultural environment can also be stressful and alienating. For sojourning students, the shift in location can entail a varying sociocultural system, which can represent both benefits and perceived risks. Therefore, it is important to acknowledge the importance of grasping and understanding of what and how students learn during their study abroad experience and which factors are going to impact their perception and intercultural adaptability. Now, Kim's integrative theory of communication and cross-cultural adaptation offers insights into the sojourner adjustment process leading towards psychological growth and intercultural identity development by emphasizing the role of communication. The stress adaptation growth model that we can see here in front of us in this figure, the stress adaptation growth model is a dynamic process. So if you can see here, each stressful experience is accompanied by negative feelings, which help the individual to develop his adaptive energy. Now, the foundation of the integrative theory of cross-cultural communication is its stress adaptation growth model, which takes the shape of a spiral displaying psychological movements in the forward and the backward directions of increased chances of adaptability and growth in the cultural environment. Now, as you can see, it is a cyclic pattern in which each stressful experience is responded by a state of regression or falling, and in turn creates an energy that pushes the sojourner to leap forward. Now, this repeated process takes part alongside the sociocultural and linguistic challenges faced by the sojourner in the host society. Now, according to this theory, adaptability and coping during international sojourn are psychological responses to stressors yielded by the struggle to meet the host cultural norms and demands and deal with people and situations that are unfamiliar. Now, consequently, the adaptation process can produce the feeling of loss of the original identity for some and stimulate personal development for others. Hence, adaptability can be influenced by a number of personal, individual, and environmental factors like age, gender, ethnicity, previous cultural experiences, coping style, personality, and the extent to which we are involved or students are involved in the society and communication. Individual and psychological factors may include aspects such as expectations, adjustment, perception, and the tolerance of students. Well, for the environmental factors, they can include host culture receptivity, demographics, the length of the stay or the immersion, the attitudes of the host culture towards the foreigners, and social and academic support as well. Well, Kim suggests that there are 3 different levels of intercultural transformation that the sojourner experiences during the adaptability process. First, the sojourner will go through the functional fitness, which allows him to interact at ease within the host cultural environment. Second, the sojourner no longer experiences emotional or mental trauma associated with the stress of relocation. And third, which is the final step, the sojourner gradually develops an intercultural identity through different experiences of trial and error. Now, this theory of cross-cultural adaptability is based on a general system perspective. Now, this perspective actually assumes that individuals adapt to changes encountered in the new host environment and strive to reach a psychological equilibrium within the new sociocultural system. Kim's theory considers that both the individual predispositions and the environmental factors influence the sojourner adaptability. But what I'm going to point at is some of the things that this theory didn't take into account. So, Kim's theory does not take into consideration that the environmental factors are not homogeneous across all the individuals, even if they live within the same environment. And also, sojourners are influenced by the environmental factors differently according to the degree of their involvement. For example, sharing cultural resources or emotional support, their involvement with others from different sociocultural and linguistic backgrounds. Also, this model of intercultural adaptability posits that while increased host receptivity might help one to adapt in terms of reaching a psychological stability, happiness, and social fitness in the new culture, conformity pressure will help them adapt in terms of learning the cultural norms of value and values of the host environment. However, the possibility of following all of those rules without actually reaching a psychological happiness and satisfaction stays possible. So, through understanding the effectiveness of this theory in the case of study abroad program, we will gain a thorough understanding of the way environmental factors and intercultural resourcefulness or preparation or guidance are going to help or to have an impact on the experiences of adaptability of students. Now, for the Algerian students' mobility, I want to introduce one of the many cooperation agreements signed between Algeria and the UK in higher education. The Algerian government started in 2014 a large funding program offering scholarships to 100 students, Algerian students annually, to continue their doctoral studies in the United Kingdom. The decision was made to grant students who graduated from their universities with distinction and high averages the chance to pursue their studies in a well-known British academic institutions. The government actually anticipated that studying abroad will enhance academic excellence and improve the quality of education when the scholars will return back home. Now, in order to introduce students to the British academia and society, the government offered laureates the chance to be enrolled in a pre-sessional course of up to five to 6 months in a specific UK university. So in only one UK university. The aim was to help students with their academic language test and also their applications and research proposals that they have to write to apply for a PhD in the university of their choice. The Algerian Ministry of Higher Education provided a short guidance program, that is, pre-preparedness program of 3 days only, where students took part in workshops as part of their pre-departure orientation before their enrollment in this pre-sessional course in the UK. However, it is worth mentioning that students were oriented only to one university. That is, in their pre-departure orientation sessions, or those 3 days, students did not, despite the fact that all students who apply for a PhD, they have the right to choose to do the pre-sessional in the university of their choice. For example, if I want to do my PhD in Bath, I have the chance to do my 6 months pre-sessional in Bath. Now, in this orientation program, stakeholders or people who are responsible for this orientation illustrated to the students that as if they don't have a choice except this specific university. Now, the reasons behind that, well, I didn't investigate further. Now, when students want to do their pre-sessional course in this one specific university, ironically, they were placed in the same dorms because I was living with them because I did an ethnographic case study. So they were living in dorms of Algerian students only. And also, in their classes, they were put in classes of Algerian students only. So there was no intercultural element whatsoever. No diversity in the dorms except for a few, and no diversity whatsoever in the classroom. As a matter of fact, I have excluded the classroom environment or the educational academic environment from my research. Why? Because when I was assisting classes with them, not only there were no other foreign students, only Algerian students kept together all the time, but also the teachers or the professors who were giving them lessons about one of the modules, which was intercultural studies, actually introduced them to their own culture. That is, instead of showing students cultural diversity in the UK and helping them in their intercultural process of adaptability in the UK, the teachers were actually displaying Algerian songs, Algerian values and norms, Algerian societal features to the students. And that was something that was not really appreciated by the students, because not only they stayed in their cultural comfort zone, grouped with their international national friends, but also there was no element from the teachers to introduce them to the UK cultural value system. So as you can see in the picture here, that was the night of a cultural event. So as you can see, all the Algerian students, despite the fact that that cultural event had people from all cultural backgrounds, we can see that Algerian students are all grouped together and raising the flag instead of taking a picture or trying to mingle with people from diverse cultural backgrounds. I guess that the students just got accustomed to the way of living in the UK within their cultural, staying despite an intercultural environment, but staying within their cultural comfort zone. So that will take us to the methodology chosen for this research, as well as the participants chosen for the study. So for this study, 8 students were sampled. The sampling was driven by the criteria of inclusion. That is, the case study was bounded right from the beginning of the research. I have sampled Algerian laureates traveling for the first time ever outside of the geographical boundaries and coming from small cities in Algeria and having very little exposure to cultural diversity, which is restricted only to media or academic courses. Purposive sampling was used in order to find the suitable cohort. The criteria were important in order to clearly explore the students' expected intercultural transformation from monocultural individuals who have a single cultural frame of interpretation to intercultural individuals with an interpretation frame that is characterized by openness to diversity, intercultural sensitivity, and the ability to adapt to new sociocultural environments. Now, my research participants have never actually taken in any part of study abroad program before. Students were born and raised in one cultural environment that is monocultural and were exposed to a single sociocultural value system throughout the whole life. Participants all identified as Arab Berbers. Now, Arabs with regard to the culture they were brought in, the language and the value system, Berbers referring to the original first inhabitants of Algeria. Now, it is worth mentioning, it is worth mentioning that that there are Berber communities in Algeria.
Sorry for the little interruption, Professor Gariche, because we have to respect the times for the presentations. We can stop it now. And if you can please sum up for us your conclusions and your findings so that then we can have 6 minutes for questions. Can you please?
Yeah. Can you see me? I don't know.
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay, because my camera is activated.
But we can hear you.
So
we
briefly,
can hear you loud and clear. No problem.
Briefly, it's because I did not receive the criteria for the video recording early. That's why it's very long. So briefly to sum up what the conclusions were, it's just that then I talked about different themes that I have received. For example, what cross and geographical boundaries has entailed for the students, the difficulties that it brought with, their experiential learning, also the different strategies that students adapted in order to adapt to the cultural milieu. And it was one very interesting theme, which was the intercultural regress instead of progress. So some students actually displayed a regress, a lack of motivation. They came very thrilled and very curious about the intercultural differences and willing to adapt to the host environment. But because of several factors, such as individual experiences, personal predispositions, lack of intercultural preparedness, lack of intercultural guidance during the program, and the type of their personality, once they faced intercultural difficulties such as instances of racism, for example, they completely withdrew from any social contact, and they preferred to stay within the cultural comfort zone, initiated no contact whatsoever with people from diverse cultural background, and expressed that they were not interested to learn about the culture and that they are eager to go back home because that's where they feel they belong. So students could not establish a positive social identity whatsoever. And that entailed a regress rather than a progress. So one of the theoretical contributions that would add to Kim's theory is that this study further developed the model of stress adaptation growth, because the data revealed that intercultural exposure can entail both regress and progress. So many components, as I said, are influential in the experience. So the stress adaptation growth that I have already shown in the presentation can be adjusted by adding that the growth that sojourners go through after repeated experiences of trial or error is not a certain outcome. So experiences of stress, confusion as a result of the intercultural exposure can also elicit a degradation in the willingness to learn and develop interculturally. And the study shows that students who were maladaptive and lacking resources for intercultural information face intercultural retrogression rather than growth, and opted for complete social separation and in-group favoritism and as an adaptability strategy. So the whole research came in order to not only develop on this theory, but also suggest how we can adjust these programs in order to help students benefit fully from the intercultural experience. So suggestions for policy, for educational institutions as well. So briefly, that was the end of the, the presentation.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Thank you for Professor Gariche. So it is now time for us to go over the questions. We will have 4 to 5 minutes, and I was having a look at the chat box, and yes. Salim has a question for this presentation. Before I lose the thread of the idea, the terms of adaptability here seems a little foggy to me. So in order to adapt, someone has to lose bits of their cultures along to the flow of the target culture. I was wondering about people who resist adaptability. Are they still adapting? Or perhaps there is another term for this? And let's go first with that first question, and then we will read the second one, Professor Gariche.
So there is a difference between adaptability and assimilation. So people who try to lose a little bit from their identity or original identity, they are more being assimilated into the new identity. Okay, so what adaptability here means in this research is that someone moves from being cultural to being intercultural. So the starting point is being monocultural, is having only one frame of interpretation, having only one frame from which we interpret differences, to being able to be tolerant, aware, so self and other aware, that is aware of our cultural stance, and also aware of interculturally aware and sensitive, and being able to categorize me with more than one cultural group based on different characteristics that are personal. For example, I can identify with a group because we have similar sports interests, for example, not necessarily because they have the same social or cultural background. So this is where the student moved from being monocultural to intercultural. That does not entail really assimilation and losing from their identity. And actually, one of the themes was a certain identity. So some students felt that within that multiculturalism and within all of the diversities that exist, trying to adapt means trying to hide some parts of their original identity, and that constituted a risk for them. So they felt the necessity of constantly asserting their identity. So I'm Muslim, I'm Arab, and etc. While some others felt that hiding some parts of their identity can help them better mingle and with the host culture, within the host culture. For example, I remember some girls said that whenever I'm with veiled girls, that means they clearly enact their religious identity. I feel that I am stigmatized and I am stereotyped. And whenever I'm alone, I feel that I can belong more. So she felt that one of the adaptability strategies was assimilation. So the fact of feeling that we need to keep our to assert identity, and the fact of feeling that hiding some parts of our identity might help us mingle, belong more, and that depends on personal strategies that every sojourner opt for in order to better perform or function effectively in the host cultural environment.
Thank you, Professor Gariche. And Salim, I think that this answer, it's a good reply for your question number 3. And don't worry, you are not dominating here. Professor Gariche, in question number 3, he expressed whether you had studied those students who suffer horribly through the difficulty of adapting to the target culture or no. I think that the example you just mentioned about the religious background of some students who had to refer back to that in order to feel like they fit it in. It replies to Salim's question, but I don't know, Salim, if that was clear for you, or you would like to have a little bit more elaboration.
Actually, the third question was the intercultural regress that I have talked about. So about some of the students, I have sampled 8. So not only one, but I have heard as a researcher about other experiences. So one of the students, because she faced racism, because she has been called names, she suffered tremendously during her intercultural experience. She opted for complete withdrawal. She stereotyped the whole British society as being intolerant, as being culturally insensitive. And she experienced an intercultural regression. So she went home eager, and it was until after. That is a complete other research. So yes, so there are other students who were actually the research talked about them a lot, and it is based on the suffering of those students that I contributed to the theoretical framework. So studying abroad and being interculturally immersed does not mean that we are going to adapt surely. It means that we can also face an intercultural regress rather than progress.
Thank you very much, Professor Gueriche, and all the other participants for your questions. Very nice presentation. If you would like to further discuss these questions and other topics on Professor Gueriche's presentation, feel free to contact her. She's going to post her email or contact info in the chat box in this moment.
Now it's working.
Yes, yeah. Technology is always a little bit of a nightmare, isn't it? Isn't it? Thank you very much, Professor Gueriche, for this very interesting presentation. We now move on to the second presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce you to, if you please allow me to pronounce the name, let's say if I can say it correctly, Professor Lieshu Kai. Did I say that right?
Yeah, but I'm not a professor, so I'm just a student. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Liu is going to talk to us about the impact of intercultural engagements on cultural understanding via the Confucius Institutes in Britain. She is currently working at the University of Glasgow, and her research interests are critical intercultural communication and cosmopolitanism. Kai, the stage is all yours. 20 minutes.
Thank you for introducing me. So I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. So I'm let me introduce myself. I'm a graduating PhD student at the School of Education of University of Glasgow in Scotland. And my research today and my topic about my PhD project is about to examine the impact of intercultural engagement on cultural understanding through the activities that offered by Confucius Institute in Britain. So firstly, I will give you a general introduction about what is Confucius Institute and what is the current situation of Confucius Institute in Britain. And then I will elaborate a little bit of the multiple voices towards Confucius Institutes, both in the Western countries and in China. And after that, I will discuss a little bit about my approach to Confucius Institute. So I'm going to only only look into the activities that are organized by Confucius Institute and say how the intercultural engagements that happened between the activity participants and the Chinese staff in CIs. So basically, I look into now intercultural experience and compare and contrast to now experience a little bit. Then after that, I propose I choose the critical cosmopolitan approach to look into my findings and my data. And in the end, I propose I developed a model which I called a possible route to an individual level of cosmopolitan competency through intercultural engagements in CIs. So here is a general background. What is Confucius Institute? So because of the Chinese economy has enjoyed a very rapid growth over the years, so Chinese wanted to showing the peaceful development and the nice image of China. So Chinese government decided to establish this kind of non-profit institute for basically for Chinese language learning and cultural exchange around the world. For example, in Glasgow, we also have the Confucius Institute in Glasgow University. And I think many universities around the world, many of them, maybe they have now Confucius Institutes in their university. So similar to the purpose of the British Council of UK, the Confucius Institute project was initiated by the Ministry of Education of Chinese government in 2004. And the CI project enjoyed an exponential growth, especially in its first decade. After 16 years development in 2020, there are 541 CIs around the world, in which 187 CIs in Europe. And obviously, UK has the largest number of Confucius Institute. There are 29, and in Britain, there are 28 Confucius Institutes. And all of these are based in universities. And I will talk about later how this kind of a unique structure will cause a lot of controversial discussions around the academic field. So here is a structure of the CIs. You can say from top to down, from the Ministry of Education and the CI headquarters, and then to the division of the continents and countries, and to each CIs in local community. And then they also have diverse forms to establish the CI. Some CIs are located in local universities, some CIs in partnership with local government and also with public or social organizations, some CI also with foreign companies. And take UK as an example, there are many types of CIs, they focus different areas. For example, the Confucius Institute at the University of Leeds in England, they focuses on business and communication. And the CI for at the University of London, IOE, Institution of Education, they focus on local schools, Chinese language learning. And CIs at South Bank University in London, they focuses on traditional Chinese medicine. And in Goldsmiths University, they focus on dance and performance. So we can say different CI have different orientation and different focus. Because of the rapid development, they received a lot of suspicious views and from Western societies. As we can say, and others analyzed the study about CIs between 2004 and 2014, both from China and from outside of China, and found that there are divergent interests regarding the research on CIs that can be found. The scholars in the English-speaking world pay special attention to the external influences of CIs on political, economical, and public democracy, and also soft power issues. However, on the other hand, the Chinese scholars tend to focus more on the internal development and the influences, such as language, how to enhance the language teaching, how to enhance the communication, intercultural communication from the micro practice. And also it happened in social media. When we say social media, that portrait of Confucius Institutes in West, they often talk about the potential hidden agenda, the political influences, and also they treat this as an ideological threat, or maybe can affect the academic freedom in Western countries, in Western universities. But in China, now is another picture. And they talk about intercultural communication and how CIs can boost the language, Chinese language learners around the world. And Michael Court concludes, there are so many anti-CI literatures, and he concludes most of these literatures have largely been a form of anti-Chinese polemics, rather than as a result of careful study or analyze, and therefore this analyzed literature has been long on concerns but very short on evidence, and takes the repetition of concerns as proof of the existence of problems. And also another empirical studies that conducted by Green Rally in US, and she concludes that these concerns over the ideological threat of these programs may be overblown by when she conducted an empirical study with 1,300 students at 2 high schools with Confucius classrooms in US. So it can be seen there are divergent interests and divergent views when people look into CIs between China and in Western society. And I kind of investigate why the potential reasons of these divergent interests and focus. It can be argued that this divergent interest in CI studies is due to maybe different standpoints, different ideological structures, and also it can be result because of the lack of understanding of each other. So it seems a certain amount of study of CI in the West take a EU-centric perspective to look into the CIs, and which views anything relating to the Chinese government negatively. Meanwhile, many CI studies done by academics living in China, they take an Eastern-centric perspective in which they are reluctant to or try to avoid further exploration of any controversial concerns or ideological conflicts in a micro context. For this reason, it's very important that a new critical and wider perspective needs to be developed for research and to investigate CIs and intercultural interaction in CIs, because there are little empirical studies that investigate what really happened in everyday CIs organization and activities. So here is my research approach. So I particularly look into the activities that are offered by Confucius Institute, except language learning and teaching, and for example, festival celebrations, cultural workshops, and cultural performance, some activities. And I try to conduct and investigate 2 views, both from activity participants and the Chinese staff in CIs. I conducted 82 online survey for participants and 13 interviews for activity participants and 17 for Chinese staffs. I try to answer the 3 research questions, which the first one is quite descriptive and at the factual level. I try to find the areas of coordinates and discoordinates between their intercultural experience. And here I just focus on my main research question, which is how can intercultural engagement within Confucius Institute activities can have an impact on cultural understanding between activity participants and Chinese staff. I choose the critical cosmopolitan approach to look into this data and these findings. This view is by, as Danity said, this view emphasizes a dimension of the capacity for individuals for self-problematization and a new way of seeing the world that result when diverse peoples experience common problems. So in this case, I look into the data, activity participants and Chinese staff no longer as 2 different groups, but look into them as independent individuals. And I found many self-transformation moments from some activity participants and the Chinese staff in the process of critically and reflectively understand the self, the other, and the new world. So firstly, I elaborate a little bit how they come to understand themselves better. By looking at self through the lens of the other, this self-reflection and self-examination can be found from the aspect of themselves and the aspect of the wider groups in which they belong. There are an interesting example about one Chinese staff. He changed her attitude towards Chinese medicine, and when she carried out many traditional Chinese medicine workshops in CIS, because she worked in that CIS, she had to organize these activities. And she gradually became less resistant to traditional Chinese medicine, and even tried acupuncture for alleviating her frozen shoulder pain. She admitted to me with a smile, and she said, if I wasn't doing this job at CI, I certainly wouldn't be going for acupuncture. In this case, cosmopolitanism and the cosmopolitan competency became internalized in her attitude for transformation. This attitude is not merely a better awareness of the perspective of the other, i.e., the popularity of Chinese medicine and the Chinese acupuncture, but with a transformative nature of herself, that is, accepted and tried Chinese acupuncture. Also, this can be found from the understanding the other through exposure to each other's culture field and engage between culture promoters and culture receivers. Both sides obtain a more comprehensive, holistic, and in-depth and even critical understanding of the other as well. For this transformation moment can be identified in the process of understanding other people and understanding social norms from different cultures and countries, such as the activity participants, they participated a lot of Chinese cultural activities. They kind of understand the Chinese festivals, the rituals, the values behind Chinese people. Also, the Chinese staff that worked in CIS, in the British context, they started to understand the work-life balance in British context. They kind of to think they will never send an email out of the working hours because they kind of work in this environment. They started to understand the others better. So by understanding self and understanding others better and critically, they gradually understand the world better. They by not only accept the view of the other, but also problematizing oneself own assumption as well as those of the other. They understanding the world better. For example, the activity engagement became one of the many ways to enhance this kind of better understanding through each person's life history trajectory. And the interaction and the engagement in CI activities became one of many intercultural experiences in their life. And some of them managed to critically connect, compare, and reflect on those experiences. This critical connection, comparison, and the reflection from them can be in the form of a cosmopolitanism, of the creative interaction of cultures and the exploration of shared world, which can further enhance the understanding of the world. So this kind of activity participants and Chinese staff, they gradually build up the cosmopolitan, an individual level of cosmopolitan competency. When I say an individual level, it's ability, because I think it's a process. It's not the kind of I achieve this goal and then let's finish. It's just a process. Some people maybe build a better ability to make their way into other cultures, but other people's maybe just they have different levels, and also they kind of tend to living and thinking beyond the local and the nation. And by by listening and looking at other people's different view and patterns of behavior with an open attitude, most of them get a better understanding of the other. By critically comparing and reflecting among their previous individual experience and the previous knowledge of self and others, and now in new intercultural experience and understandings, some of them got a better understanding of self. By creatively interacting with cultures and exporting a shared world, they gained a better understanding of the world as a whole. And at the end, here is the, I developed a model for future study in intercultural communication and cosmopolitan competency. I named it as a possible route to achieve an individual level of cosmopolitan competency through intercultural engagement in CIs. So you can take a look, and if you want to ask me questions about the model, feel free to ask me later. Thank you.
Thank you, Lei Xu. Very interesting and nice presentation. Now we open the space, 10 minutes for questions. Please feel free to use your microphones or type them down in the chat box.
Should I close the share screen or I just leave it here?
Yeah, you can stop sharing the screen. No problem.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So let's see, do we have any questions for the issue?
Yeah, maybe it's not a common topic. I just examine a very specific institute, and yeah, many people may be not familiar with this.
Yeah, with the framework, the idea of the cosmopolitan approach to the sometimes very difficult topic of intercultural understanding.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. So how to pronounce your name, by the way?
My name is Edward Piccoli. Edward.
Oh, Edward. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Nice to meet you too. Okay. While the rest of the participants are okay, I think we have one question. Yes, William, go ahead, please.
Okay.
Oh, hi. Thank you very much for that presentation. It's really needed extra information in this topic. I'm coming from a university in the United States, and we just had our Confucius Institute closed.
Yeah.
Like many universities are going to this moving into this direction, and there's certainly a great need for more understanding of China in the United States, in everywhere really, and the Confucius Institute is a great platform for that. But as it seems that it's been situated often in the soft diplomacy structure, where whether it's the Alliance Française or the Instituto Cervantes or the what used to be the American Culture Center, all of these were efforts at teaching people about culture and communication. So my question is that since it's already being positioned within this political framework of soft diplomacy, and I would say a problem in the media, the mainstream media, is positioning China as secretive or hiding information, or there's something going on in the Confucius Institute that is secret, So, but when as we work in the university, we're language teachers as well, and we know the teachers at the Confucius Institute are language teachers, right? So we're all just trying to educate our communities. But within this political framework, how do you see a greater sort of transparency of the Confucius Institute? I mean, it's I think there's something that needs to be some new ideological direction and I was looking at new Chinese theorists that were proposing new research, non-Western centered research, and I don't see you using that in this presentation. I don't see China-centered researchers with new ideas about what is the framework of Chinese network communication, which the Confucius Institute is a part of. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. That's a very important fact that so many, when I conducted my research in back to 2018, there was not so many Confucius Institute closed at that time in US because the relationship between US and China become badly decreased and in recent years, and it closed a lot since, especially in last year. And so it's a very important fact. And also you mentioned about you want to say something from the Chinese centers. And I remember I attended this conference 2 years ago. I asked Professor Holiday about the Asian-centered approach. And at that time, I want to select this kind of approach to investigate my study. And his view towards Asian-centered. There are also some studies about Asian-centered. It's kind of another arguing. It's just opposite to Eurocentric, and it's Asian-centric. It's kind of the other way around. And so I think we should look into the problems from both sides, not just Eurocentric or Asian-centric. We need to say it in both sides. And also in my research, I didn't talk today about the CI activities, and I adopt a critical intercultural communication approach to look into how these CI activities that can be shaped by the micro context because of the political, historical, and cultural and geopolitical influence, economical relations, and how these cultural activities can be shaped by this micro context. Because in my study, culture is not a static and nation-based idea. It's a power struggle, ideological laden system, and a power struggle concept. So I look into culture in that way, and I find the CI activities that organized by CI tend to be traditional, cultural related. They don't talk about political that much, and also they talk about many economical development of China, and with a political tendency. So there is no political discussion now because it's too sensitive. If they talk a lot, they will say, "Oh, it's a Chinese." You say social media will portray in a very bad way. But if you didn't say anything about political discussion around in Confucius Institute in the activities, the social media, Western social media also say because they are censorship. So it's kind of a dilemma for them. Should they talk about politics in Confucius Institute, some political issues in Confucius Institute, or should they not to talk about this kind of issues and controversial issues in Confucius Institute? For them, such as yesterday, the keynote also mentioned there is a dilemma for language teachers, whether they should engage in political discussion or not. This also happened in the language teachers in Confucius Institute. So I don't have enough time to talk about the micro context and how these different contexts and the power struggles impact on the activity organization in Confucius Institute. I hope I answered your question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, thank you. That is a dilemma, and that we're all working. We're all trying to work through that. you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. But we're teachers and we have to find a way forward with this. And if you look historically, you'll see historical waves of racism and violence against people that we want to avoid. You know, and we have a responsibility as teachers.
Yeah, indeed. But how to deliver that under the limits, just like Carol said, and yeah. So it's very hard to do so. Yeah.
I don't see a way of avoiding the more descriptive approach on the political side. I don't see a way forward without engaging in that now, in the context of the United States, at least. It must be addressed. So how do you address it in a positive way to increase understanding between peoples? That's the direction for me.
Yes. So last word, yeah, I learned from the net framework who Danek, and he said, although we are living in a more and more globally linked world, but it doesn't mean we live in a cosmopolitan world, because we are living so divergent world. Although we are socially connected by internet, by social media, but still our views are divergent. Yeah, become a big gap.
非常谢谢你啊。
Because thank you for your questions. Yeah, I hope to discuss with you later. So yeah.
You can type your contact info on the chat box so that William and the rest of the participants can get in touch with you. But before we go to the next presentation, we still have 2 minutes, no more than that, 2 minutes.
Okay.
There is another question by Ting Ting Xiong. What is the cosmopolitan approach to be exact? Because certainly this has been a little bit confusing for all of us, and as it is a new concept for all of us. Could you please elaborate on it? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, because it's a kind of philosophical idea a little bit. So maybe some people, maybe it's very hard to explain it well. I think the critical cosmopolitan competency is the for individual level is by acknowledging the people have this kind of capacity for self-problematization. So self-critical reflection and the self-transcendence and the self-pluralization. So kind of self-critically self-reflection. So by acknowledging people have this kind of ability, so and to say the word, to encounter with others, this approach, and with this approach, people can achieve cosmopolitan competency to a certain level. Yeah.
Okay, now it's clear for me. I don't know if Ting Ting expresses gratitude for the clarification. Liu Xu, thank you very much for these interesting contributions. We now have to move forward to the next presenter. It's my pleasure to introduce now the next presentation, which is entitled "It Comes Down to Respect," a positioning analysis of identity investment in learning Spanish by Carlo Chinaglia, who is currently working at the Michigan State University in the United States, and whose research interests are to do with language teaching and learning. Carlo, the microphone and cameras are all yours. Welcome, 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Edward, for chairing this session. And I want to say thank you to the conference organizers for putting our 3 sessions together. And thank you, Amina and Liu Xu, for your presentations, because I think there are some themes here. I'm going to share my screen. And actually, let me do this. Sorry. Okay. Can you see this okay?
Yes.
Hold on. Bear with me, I apologize. After 18 months of Zoom, you'd think I've figured it out by now.
Okay. Don't panic.
Perfect. Yes, so I'll get my camera out of the way. Yeah, so it comes down to respect is the reason for why my focal participant has chosen to study Spanish. So if we're thinking about the development of intercultural competence, this experience of transformation, and thinking about it as a long-term process that occurs from interaction with different individuals, I think there's some connections here. I really appreciate how Lieshu was talking about this idea of critical reflection about the self in relation to the others, and the problematization of initial ideas, and the reconsideration of what it means to be an individual in relation to others in the world. I think that's sort of what comes through in some of the data from my presentation here. I am currently a graduate student at Michigan State University, whose Confucius Institute unfortunately was just closed, but this study was conducted at a smaller liberal arts university elsewhere in the United States that doesn't have a Confucius Institute or an Instituto Cervantes or anything like that. And so what I was looking at for this project is why college students in the United States from an English background, English-speaking background, why do they choose to continue or discontinue studying foreign languages, world languages in the United States? And so what we're looking at in this presentation is a case study of one focal student who continued to study Spanish after the 2-semester foreign language requirement. And so through this process of narrative interviewing, which led to critical reflection, what I'm seeing here and what I'm interpreting here is her development of an awareness of linguistic relations in the world, and what that means for how she understands herself as a user of Spanish and an invested learner of Spanish. And so I just wanted to kind of make that connection there, and thank Amina and Lieshu for sort of setting the stage and allowing me to make those connections. So I'm going to follow a pretty typical outline here. In terms of my presentation structure. The only thing I want to show here is that I'm going to talk about my findings in 2 parts. The first part involves sort of a content analysis, and the second part involves a discourse analysis, a positioning analysis. And I'm actually going to put in the chat a link to a handout here. It's optional. You don't have to look at it. You can if you want to, but it's a longer transcript. If you'd like to follow along, you can. And if you want to just look at it afterwards, that's totally fine too. So as I mentioned, this is what it looks like. It's a transcript of a few pages. So I'll get to that in a second. And so I'm situating my study in the backdrop is foreign language study in the United States and other Anglophone contexts. And so research conducted by the Modern Language Association, ACTFL, et cetera, have observed a not surprising declining enrollment overall in foreign language education in the United States. And sadly, this leads to programs such as the Confucius Institute or other just language departments being reduced or just eliminated in US universities. And so researchers have investigated that. So why do students stop studying the foreign language? We might think that students aren't interested in studying world languages, but actually it turns out students are interested, but there are other factors at play. And so within universities, there are language requirements, there are 75,000 other curricular requirements. And so students have to navigate this institutional system that actually doesn't prioritize learning foreign languages, even though it is a university requirement that supposedly leads to cultural diversity. And so how do students navigate that, and what are the effects of this institution that prioritizes monolingualism in terms of its actual policies? And so a couple of researchers have looked at how this affects students' interest in learning world languages, and some students actually want to work against that and develop this interest in studying languages. And so I think that's what we'll see here on kind of a small scale. I just want to highlight Varghese work a few years ago, looking at this process of individuals deciding to continue or discontinue studying foreign languages. What am I supposed to do within the institution, my university that I study with, and how am I supposed to move forward with my individual desires and interests? And so this tension here is one way that students are engaging in a process of identity negotiation. And so I think that's kind of central. And so given that focus on identity, I am interested in investment as a theoretical framework. And so it's similar to motivation, our interest in, our engagement with, and commitment to second language learning, but looking more at the social context, less of an internal experience and more of a social experience. And so if you're not familiar with Ron Darvin and Bonnie Norton's concept of investment, their 2015 reconceptualization of investment consists of 3 components: identity, capital, and ideology. And so as you can see here, ideologies or dominant ways of thinking can value different forms of knowledge, for example, like second language knowledge, a form of capital, and whether or not you have that resource, that knowledge, or whether or not you're interested in that resource or that knowledge, you are positioned as invested or not as an invested or non-invested learner. And so maybe you're interested in learning a language, but you don't stand to benefit from investing in a certain type of knowledge that's not valued in your institutional context. And so it's trickier than just an individual wanting or not wanting to learn a language internally. And so this is the framework that I'm using, the lens that I'm using. And so previous studies have looked at investment among second language learners, especially in Anglophone contexts, and have looked at how investment is linked to participation in multilingual communities and how different kinds of capital are associated with learning a language, which leads to students investing in different ways in learning language. Xiao and Lu's study have looked specifically at this similar context, but a different language. So students moving from high school to university study in the United States, wanting to learn Chinese, but not that interest not aligning with the interest reflected by their institutions. And so discontinuing studying foreign language because of that. Matthew Sung did a study in Hong Kong of students learning English and found students who were studying between Hong Kong and the UK, I believe, and was finding that students' identities and investments were sort of context specific. And so in different communities with different groups of people, their identity as an invested user shifted. So that's kind of interesting. And then Barkhuizen did a study a decade ago about a teacher who was looking at investment about the teacher's identity as a language teacher and how this teacher was thinking about what are the real world consequences for me as well as for my family and friends, the community members that I engage with, the effect on them of my learning language or not, or teaching language or not. And so I think in different ways, these studies look at how an individual's interest in and engagement with learning language or even teaching language is connected to the broader world around them, their relationships, their communities. And so, yeah, I'll come back to that in a bit. So in my analytical framework, in addition to my conceptual framework of investment, my analytical framework is narrative inquiry. I'm looking at how story is used to make sense of experience. And so I take a content approach to examine what my participant talks about in her narrative reflection, but I also take a discourse approach to examine how she narrates her story. How does she construct her story? And so in identity is constructed discursively, we know that. And so what I'm interested in is understanding how she talks about her identity as well as how she produces her identity. And so a specific type of discourse analysis that I'm taking here is looking at positioning analysis. So how identity positions are constructed through discourse. And excuse me. So I'm looking at my focal participant's identity construction on 3 levels. So she tells a story about learning language. And so I'm looking at how she positions the people in her story, how she positions herself in relation to the people in those stories, and how she positions herself in relation to the ideologies, the dominant discourses that are in the backdrop of her story. And so, yeah, and so my research questions are looking at those 3 components of investment. So how are Morgan's investment and identity shaped by different ideologies surrounding multilingualism? So specifically, how does capital serve as an affordance for her learning or investment? What prevailing ideologies about learning constrain or enable her investment? And how does she construct her identity through positioning herself in relation to others? And so the first 2 questions, we'll look at some interview excerpts with the content analysis, and the third question, I'll show you some excerpts from the longer transcript in the chat through positioning analysis. And so, as I mentioned before, the study was conducted at a liberal arts university, a small university in the Northeast United States. And so there are 2 semesters of required foreign language study. Most students stop continuing, foreign languages after this requirement. Morgan was the focal participant in my study because she actually continued taking Spanish classes after this requirement, which was kind of interesting. And I will note, Morgan is a former student of mine. This emerged from a larger project where after I left this university to begin graduate study, I was in contact with former students about, their ideas about the foreign language requirement after having completed it. And Morgan was a different case because she was still continuing to take Spanish classes. And so that's sort of why she was selected as a focal participant. So she had a different instructor for her 3rd university Spanish class, which is salient later, which comes up later. So so Morgan's journey in a nutshell is she talks about a previous experience in high school where she participated in a global leadership conference where she met people from all over the world. In college now, she was taking Spanish classes, and then she talks about the future where she is considering possibly studying abroad. And so in terms of collecting data, I engaged with semi-structured interviews with Morgan via Zoom. And so the first interview was kind of broad, looking at her learning experience, her ideas about the foreign language requirement, language learning in general. But when she started to talk a little bit more about this previous experience at the conference and her ideas about being interested in what she called cross-cultural communication, I thought, this is something that's worth exploring a little bit more. And so we had a follow-up interview where I asked her specifically to go back to this topic and tell me some stories about it. And so I'm engaging in, like I mentioned before, a content analysis of the investment components in general, ideology, capital, a little bit of identity, but then specifically taking a discourse lens and looking at how she constructs identity positions. And so I'm going to talk about the findings for the first two questions for the content analysis. And so in terms of how capital plays a role in her investment in language learning, she kind of sees how language learning is valued differently in different contexts. And she talks about the experience of discomfort as a valuable form of capital that can help you learn. And then in terms of ideologies shaping her investment, she talks about the foreign language requirement, and she tries to think of it as more than a foreign language requirement. And so she compares her interests and her priorities with those of her peers, those of her instructors. But in the end, even though she's got this different idea of what the foreign language requirement can be, she's still kind of constrained by the fact that it is a requirement. And in her words, it only goes so far. And so we'll look at some examples of this. Okay, so in terms of capital, she is finding here that her peers all around her are learning English, and that is just a shocking experience to her. And so here, she sees the role that English plays in their lives. She becomes aware of this as something that's different from her experience, and she's uncomfortable, she's confused by this. And so she sees that it's valued in different contexts around the world. And so for her, she's comparing these expectations that she faced, that her peers faced about language learning. And she talks about learning Spanish for students maybe in her situation, English L1 students from the United States, as a duty or moral to learn the second language. She says that we're not encouraged to learn that. And so she's kind of critical of these different expectations that are placed upon her and her peers. And so you can see this beginning emergence of this critical idea towards initial ideas, right? And so here she talks a little bit about discomfort. It's important to feel that discomfort. And so discomfort can be valuable for learning. She talks about, what she's looking for. She wants to be able to understand others, right? She's talking about how she's interested in this kind of learning experience with learning outcomes that are more than just language development. And so if capital is about how things are valued differently, ideologies are about how that value is constructed. What are the belief systems that result in those values? And so here in this excerpt, she's talking about her peers on her campus and kind of what they think about the foreign language requirement and how that relates to what she thinks. And so she talks about them, they roll their eyes, they don't see it as necessary, they don't get any benefit from it. And so you can see she's starting to position herself as differently from peers of on her college campus about why they might or might not want to learn a language. And in the next excerpt, she's talking about the language class that she's in, the different professor that she's in. And so she is talking about the focus in this new class on the detail, what she calls the details, grammatical accuracy, and how she, as you can see in the bottom few lines, she's more interested in the cross-cultural communication side of things rather than, she uses the term being fluent. I think what she's talking about is grammatical accuracy. And so this kind of comes to a head where she's talking about going far enough. There's been times when I've thought I've gone far enough. So she's taking stock of where she is, what she's done, and where she wants to go. She's talking about this is my last class. I don't think I'm going to take classes after this. I want something else. And so I think this reflects agency in how she redirects her investment. She invests in not really what's valued by the dominant ways of thinking, but she's interested in a different type of learning experience. So she's invested as a learner of Spanish, but not in what this curriculum is providing her. And so she does want to continue studying abroad in a different context, but not necessarily in this context. So it's kind of illustrative there. And so I'm going to kind of pause here, seeing where we are on time, and give you a preview of what might come next, but not dive into all of it. So whereas the initial excerpts I analyzed through content analysis, the latter excerpts I've analyzed through positioning analysis. And so I'm using the idea, of small story analysis here. And so a big story can be thought of as somebody's entire life experience. The extracts that I just showed you of Morgan's interview could be snapshots of her short story, right? The excerpt, the handout that I've placed in the chat would be an example of a small story. This is a longer narrative that's embedded in conversation, where in one long turn, Morgan kind of shifts between different storylines. Okay, and small story analysis here, I just want to emphasize, Barkhuizen talks about this as a useful kind of context to examine identity positioning, because small story analysis focuses on the performance aspect of storytelling, right? How narratives are constructed, right? How identity is constructed through storytelling. And so if the snapshots of Morgan's interview focused on the conference, her experience learning Spanish, and her future plans of studying abroad, the small story that you'll see in the transcript, if you take a look, follows a similar trend, but it's kind of in one longer narrative. She's talking about this conference, what it means for her, and then how she might apply that to going about learning using languages in the world, and then what it means, how she understands the relationship between different languages in the world and the responsibility we might have speaking about, monolingual students in the United States, English L1, to try to learn another language as a form of respect and push back against this inequality. And so I do see the time, and I'm not going to dive into all of this. I'm happy to talk more about this if you'd like. I'm just going to skip through a little bit. Here might be a preview, if you'll allow me a few minutes to just talk about this here. On level 1, the content and the characters in Morgan's story. So she contrasts her experience with that of her international peers outside the US, and she constructs an identity for herself as a privileged United States student, American student. Level 2 positioning would be how she interacts with me as well as the audience of her story. And so most of the time I'm the audience of her story, but there is a component of her story where she gives advice to a hypothetical listener. So she gives advice about respectful travel and language, and being a respectful sojourner. And so I'm interpreting that as her constructing an identity as an intercultural ambassador. She, at certain points, engages in meta commentary to avoid overgeneralizing about certain topics. And so I'm interpreting that as a component of intercultural awareness. And so she's not only an intercultural ambassador, but she's an interculturally aware learner. And then she takes an opinion and a stance towards problematic ideas about linguistic inequality. And so I'm interpreting that as her constructing an identity as an advocate for multilingualism, right? So recognizing her position of privilege, being kind of critical of that, pushing towards and advocating for ideas that align with intercultural awareness and multilingualism. And so each of those align with the ideologies on level 3, as you can see, that are the backdrop of her story. So I'm not going to talk in depth about the findings here because I do see the time, but I will finish up here by talking about why I think this matters. Right, so we know that capital ideology and identity are all aspects of the investment model, and they are certainly aspects in Morgan's experience in terms of why she wants to continue learning Spanish in her way. I'll talk about that later if you'd like, but I think this is important. So in Morgan's story, I mean, she reflects on this experience she had several years ago in high school, but I don't get to see that experience. But I do see that the experience of being at the Global Leadership Conference in high school, where she met peers from all over the world, clearly had a strong impact on her and challenged her to think differently about the world, both then and now later on when she's in a university studying language, surrounded by, for the most part, peers who are in the same situation as her, monolingual from the United States. And so I think exchanges like this, experiences like this could be a really important starting point for fostering not only investment in foreign language learning, but critical intercultural awareness of the sociopolitics of language, right? Because if we're teaching language, this conversation that we had before in the chat and in the room, what is our responsibility as language educators do we introduce the political? Do we not? We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. I would say that if we're teaching students, if it's a language course, it's important to learn not just language, but about language, the social relations between language users and languages in the world. That's important. So a lot of times that exists in language programs, but it's usually a special topics course for language majors. I wonder what that might look like if these topics were introduced maybe in Spanish 102 and in the first year of university study. I'm curious about what that might entail, right? So it was clear in Morgan's experience that focusing just on verb conjugations was not what she wanted to gain from learning a language. So I have some references here if you're interested in exploring this more. I apologize for having rushed through the second part. If you would like to get in touch further, you're more than welcome to get in touch with me here. I really appreciate you joining us from all over the world for this conference this week. I've had a great time. I hope you've had a great time too. I will pause now and return to the room.
Thank you very much, Carlo. We are now opening the space for questions. Please feel free to ask Carlo. I'm just using the Spanish version of your name. I'm sorry.
It's the story of my life. It doesn't help that I've never taught Italian and I teach Spanish, and yeah. So at this point, I've adopted Carlos as my name as well. So it's all good.
My apologies.
No, it's okay.
Well, apparently our colleagues are a little bit afraid of asking questions because it entails a little bit of politics. Oh, okay, William, you have a question. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Carlo, for your presentation. Interesting. I'm
sorry, William, your audio got cut out. Could you please type your question in the chat box?
Oh, am I there?
We can hear it cuts out every other second. You're a little bit there, but it might help if you typed in the chat. Yeah, sorry.
So this certainly takes us again to the dichotomy between involving politics when teaching a language in the language classroom. In Colombia, and in Latin America, as it has been shown throughout the week, we are experiencing this issue on a daily basis. For instance, last semester when we had these protests and riots all over the country, it was very hard for me actually to go over those topics. I did my best to connect it to the content that we were studying in class. Anyway, some students were reluctant. And guess what? The university gave them free time to attend the protests, like for the very first time ever in this university. And some students didn't want to. They just wanted to attend class and go over content. So in that very moment, we start to deal with issues like, okay, should I oblige them? Should I adapt the class more to go over this content? Are they really worried about the situation of the country or what is happening? Are they really worried about their future? Am I going to be fired? Am I going to keep my job here? So all these variables, also, I pretty much believe to all of my colleagues around the world, cross our minds on a daily basis. And it's hard because you feel that it's your duty, it's your call to talk about it because we're shaping the way our students understand the world. First, the way they understand a foreign language, as in my case, I'm teaching English as a foreign language to undergraduate students, and how they are going to use that language, number one, to understand themselves and their reality, and number two, to communicate not only in the academic world, but also on a daily basis with the rest of the world and talk about where they come from and who they really are. So it's sort of a very, very tough battle on a daily basis. But let's see, William, we go back to your question.
And maybe William is typing it.
Yeah,
I think that's fascinating. The students, some maybe a little reluctance to talk about the topics or even engage in or watch the protests. There was an interesting part of Morgan's second interview. Oh, I'm going to pause and look at William's question. Vista Higher Learning Platform is taking over many of our Spanish classes at the 100 to 200 level. These are e-courses not requiring as much instructor input. This will be an interesting study. I am not familiar. I've never used the Vista Higher Learning Platform. I mean, I've heard of it. I know that it's there, but I'm not sure. I guess what William is pointing to here is the not requiring as much instructor input. Yeah. So I wonder, William, do you think these? I mean, it sounds like you're familiar with this platform. Do you think there is a chance for this platform to focus more on the socio-political, or maybe not so much?
Yeah, I think that, can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear, perfect.
Oh, okay, great, thanks. Yeah, it's interesting because instructors certainly are becoming more as assistants instead of content leaders. And they're assisting with a pre-formed program. And Vista Higher Learning contains videos, it contains certain political ideologies, but I know this is used by many universities in the US now. So it is interesting how the political position is developed on this platform. So that's just one point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I appreciate you sharing that, and I think what Edward was saying, as instructors, sometimes we're caught between different tensions. You know, we want to do what's going to engage our students because we want them to continue studying and we want them to develop their language skills, but also their awareness of the world. We want to do what we believe is the right thing to do, right? Planting seeds of intercultural curiosity, perhaps. We want to do what's not going to get us fired by our administrators, right? Who are expecting us to comply with certain rules. And so we talk a lot in the courses that I'm taking now about, teachers as policymakers and rethinking the idea of language policy as this, it's not just top-down laws or curricula, but rather what's the possibility for teachers in that, negotiating the tension between top-down pressures and bottom-up abilities, right? Structure and agency to really reinterpret and reshape policy in the classroom in a way that complies with the expectations, but also reflects the values that we as teachers would like to try to imbue in our classrooms. And so it's tough, right? But
this is the corporate model. And if you look at the tenured track positions available in language departments, you'll find a trend more towards the clinical professor or the FA. It's definitely going in that direction. The statistics prove that. Those are year-long contracts for language assistants now. I'm an old language teacher, so I remember the Clinton administration and Bush 1, when multicultural education was politically aggressively pursued in terms of multinational corporate interests. And so your use of capital in this presentation reminds me of the corporatization of language instruction as well. The value added that you can demonstrate on your corporate resume, which was a great way to enter the classroom with the development of capital. And then we would sort of secretly insert ideology, as we all were going against the grain, is what we said in the 1980s. That you would talk about deeper and using literature then, and using other cultural production to get underneath the skin of the corporate people after they were able to prove their language proficiency,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is definitely a pity because it's not only over there, guys, that it's happening. Sorry if you allow me to call you guys, but it's also happening here. Now, like, we are becoming like assistants or like tools when, hey, the first thing that should be prioritized in teaching languages is not dehumanizing the profession. And with this boom of AI, I don't know what is going to happen to us as professionals, and also to the development of the intercultural communicative competence. I don't know if a robot could do that. If a robot perhaps would be able to teach the rest of the world about key components of the Latin American, the Colombian, Mexican, Venezuelan, Costa Rican, Argentinian aspects that distinguish us from the rest of the world. If we will have a multicultural robot, I don't know, or who might lead the next missions to Mars and the other planets on the Milky Way. But this is actually dehumanizing our profession and taking away crucial aspects and competences, such as the intercultural communicative competence, the development of this crucial competence. I don't know if the rest of the participants have any other questions. Okay, Felix just texted something here.
Perhaps linguistic capital can be understood as gain, a humanistic and humane one, of course. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what's cool about the investment model, which I will admit, and Ron Darvin admits that, he has received some I'll say critical commentary from other scholars, like, why are you using capital? That's such an economic thing. But what he's drawing on is Bourdieu's notion of capital understood in multiple ways: symbolic capital, cultural capital, economic capital. So it's about relationships, social capital. It's about relationships and connections with people. It's about knowledge that's valued in different places. And so, yes, the idea of capital is still, a value-based economic metaphor, but I think if we can, help students to reframe this idea of value as not just monetary value, but value in terms of human connection, value in terms of understanding more about the similarities and differences and complexity of the human experience, the value of being interested in what the world is like over there, right? And what are people like over there? And how is that maybe not so different from me, right? That curiosity. And it's tough because, like you said, Edward, some students are interested in that, and some students, it's just going to be one more requirement or one more less thing they'd have to do. Oh, I have time off to go to the protest. Oh, it's just more time to catch up on the other 10 things I have to do. And so I think there's a lot of factors and a lot of variables that are worth exploring further, I would say. So.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Carlo, once again, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the questions and comments.
We have one last comment here.
I would agree. It doesn't happen overnight.
Definitely.
And I like the tree metaphor.
Yeah, I also like the use of even though it goes back to the system that William was denouncing a couple of minutes ago, but if I remember correctly, it was Mr. Bourdieu, sorry for my French, who pointed out the notion of the symbolic capital. At the end of the day, that's what makes this endeavor of learning another language and learning about other culture one of the most precious things we humans have. Like, some people might disagree, but I have always believed that the more you get in touch with others' worldviews and try to understand why and how they act, the more I would say enrich our life experience will be in this planet. Thank you very much, dear participants, for these beautiful and tremendous contributions and insights. Now, I'm sorry that we have to stop. I would like to ask you for one last thing, to please switch your cameras on so that we can have a screenshot for the memoirs of this parallel room. Don't be shy, come on. Thank you, Alicia. Okay, please say cheers. And 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been a tremendous pleasure. We will now stop with these parallel sessions, and I'm looking forward to meeting you again next year in this event. Have a very, very nice weekend, and muchas gracias. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Edward. Take care, everyone.